So I've gotten a few requests on how I made my isometric assets for modern and sci-fi. This will be my tutorial on perspective and how to make your own assets using the shape tools and the line tools. So as you can see here, this is my original attempt. This was before I did all my lighting, shadows, and things like that, and a lot of the finer detail work of the final maps that I've posted, like this night map with the grid, if it decides to load, and even my daytime version, which you can see has all these different lighting effects and shadows. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail with that. Today we're just going to mostly focus on how to create your assets, since we do not have access currently to modern sci-fi cityscapes and things like that. So you're going to go in and you're going to go into your average open, make your own map. I'd say start with sci-fi battle maps if you're going to do something a little bit more sci-fi. So go ahead and make a basic square 40 by 40 map and let that load. And so from here, go ahead and just go into ink and find the core black fill and fill it black. Just make the background completely black. You're not going to have to worry about anything getting in the way. Go into your grid and turn on your grid. Now, since we're going to be working in isometric, you're just going to go into the isometric squares. And now there's too many squares here. I feel like you can't get as much detail with a lot of things getting in your way. So I like to turn down my grid to be 20 by 20. I went a little bit too far. 20 by 20 gives me a lot of space to work with and really make my things in the correct orientation and the correct size that I like. So you're going to go into the new line and shape tool and you're going to do the shapes. And first we're going to start off by making just the faces of the buildings that we're going to be making. So I look for something a little bit more basic, something maybe concrete, brick, or metal, depending on the kind of building I'm making. But we're just going to go with something basic like this concrete railing. And so it will naturally start you on the free draw. Now, if you can somehow draw a perfectly straight line, especially on a mouse and keyboard, I applaud you. But I'm going to use the pen tool. And with the pen tool, if you hold control, it will come up with this little almost directory where it'll show you what kind of angle you can make with it. So I'll scroll in here and I'm going to use this to make my lines a lot straighter. Before we do that though, you can use a fill option to make the inside of the shape you're going to make be filled, unless you just want something outlined and want to fill it later. But I'd recommend using the fill tool. It starts you out on just a color, and you can really change your color however you want. If you want to go a little more technicolor, you can do that. But I like the textures because I feel like I can really change the brightness and everything with these a little bit better than the color tool. So we're going to go into this, go into the sci-fi since I'm doing something a little bit more modern sci-fi. Clear out my search, and I'm going to look for something a little bit more in line with that, like this city roof texture. It doesn't have a lot going on, and it's pretty basic, but it will go with something a little bit more concrete building structure-wise. So with this, if you're going to really make a huge cityscape on something like this, you want to have a guide. And so what you can do is in the top right corner or top left corner, whichever you want to do, you can make yourself a little reminder. And now you can see here the stroke stamp scale is really thick. You probably don't want that. So we're going to turn it down to about 10. So it's not going to make the lines super thick. And I'm going to first, by holding the control, you can see it sticks you to this pattern. I'm going to make my first face of this building. Now, it's not going to be perfect, but just follow the edge of the grid, hit right click, and you will get this guide, and you can move this around. Line it up the best you can, and just hit the plus, and it will fill in your object. And now you have a face of your cube you're going to make. And we're just going to continue on making the opposite face to make a cube. Now, you don't want to line overlap these because if you do, it will create a single object without this seam in the middle. See how we have two faces that are completely separate? If you get them to overlap, it will make this one object with just the angle, and you're not going to get that perspective you want. Now, if we're making a building, you want the roof to probably be different. The roof is a big part of that. So I'm going to use this dark patched asphalt to make it just a little bit more distinct that, hey, this is the top of this cube. And you can see my line doesn't quite line up. If you really are picky, you can let go of control and line it up yourself. But for this example, I'm not going to be too picky about it. And just line it up the best you can. And when you're done, you right click, and now you have the top. And so you have this cube. Now, the current color and texture, you might not be able to discern, hey, this is supposed to be, this shape. And so what you can do is you can go into the advanced options and you can lower the brightness of one side just a little bit to create a shadowed effect. Since these objects aren't going to be able to create their own shadows, you're going to have to do a lot of the shadow work yourself. Now, this is your basic kind of shape. And so you can always go while you're building your thing and look back and go, okay, this is the shape I need to kind of stick with, and this is the scale I want to work with. This one tile bottom, one tile top, using that size comparison. Now, if we wanted to move this and change the scale, if we don't create a group for it and try to move it, you can see each object moves on its own. So all you're going to have to do is right click it and create a group. And you can name it something like basic, something plain. And now that you have it in a group, you can really change the scale to your liking. You can make multiple of these and stack them on the same tile, or, copy it, and suddenly you have two, and you can stack them on top of each other and make, very interesting looking buildings off of this scale. Now, this also works in other formats other than just the pure cube. Say you want to make something that is a longer building. You follow the general holding control. You can follow the general shape, but instead, let's make this a longer building. Let's make this 3 tiles long. Just follow the general rule of thumb of making it a quadrilateral. And now we have a new face. And you can do the same thing, but let's make this building not so wide. Let's make this the same width as the original building. Follow the lines, and now we have a building. Oh, see, I overlapped it a little bit, and we have this joining of the texture, so you don't get that seam. So all you do is just Control Z, undo it, make them a little bit farther apart, and if you keep having it happen to you, all you have to do is when you hit right click and it gives you this texture, you can just scoot it away a little bit, create the texture there, back out, grab it, and scoot it back up against it. Now they're not going to join, and you get maybe some little bit more shadows here, and say, hey, this is going to be still that face and this orientation of the lighting. I like to have my lighting come in from the top left of the scene, and so I like to make this have a little bit darker of a face since there's going to be shadows cast on this. So you can go and really make it your own. You don't want to make it too dark, obviously, but enough shadow that people know, hey, this is this side of this building. And then follow the same rule for the top. You can grab that asphalt texture or whatever darker texture you want. You can even use the metal shingling, depending on the building you're making, and make a square top. And now you have a roof. Now, a building needs more than just sides and walls for people to understand, hey, your players are maybe confused on what the heck something is. And so I had reached out to one of the Discord members, and he gave me a really cool recommendation for making windows. There's this texture in here that's a side table, and I used it in a lot of my buildings. And you can find this second side table that is regularly shaped, not that odd curvy one. And you can see, if you put it to the scale, it looks a little odd. It's a little tall for what this building is going to be. So let's turn off the random stamp, and let's go in and transform it a little bit to make it look the way we want it. I'm going to run this thing down to about 50. And now, as you look, it looks a little bit more like a window. You can even go in and change the color, change the hue, make it pink, purple, whatever you want to do. I like the standard color for this because it's a little bit glassy. It reminds me of a window in color, sheen of light bouncing off of glass. and you can go in and place them against your drawing. Now, it's hard to get a straight line when placing an object, especially when you're not using a grid, and since we're using isometric, we can't snap it to the grid. So what you can do, if you're having a hard time keeping them in line, is you can go into the line tool, and holding control, it'll give you a good guide, and you can make a line, temporary line, across the building to really line up your windows. And you go, okay, well, this one's a little over, this one's not. And just use your arrow keys and bounce them around, space them out however you like. And now you have windows. But for the other face, you look, this window just doesn't quite look right. It looks a little off. So all you have to do is go and use the flip horizontal. And flipping it to the other angle makes it look like it's on this face a little bit better, in the same angle that these are on that face. And all you're going to do is just line them up the way you like, and you now have windows. And in a larger building, once you get them all set up the way you would like, you can go and create your own group of these. We can call this guy the long building, and shrink it, scale it to whatever, and you can make layered buildings, or if you want to make a skyscraper, you can copy these windows and line them up, and now you have a lot of windows, make it look like it's much more lived in. You can also take these and lower their brightness, make it look like nobody's home, make it looks like the lights are off, or you can even change the color of the lights inside with the hue option, like I said. Now that we're on, I'm going to rewind this a little bit, make it fit to the scale. Now, we're on this grid here. It's kind of hard to draw straight lines, but what you can do is just go in to your stamp tool, and you can change it to the grid blocks, and it will still line up with the isometric grid. Let's say you want to make streets for these buildings. Well, you just go in one at a time. You can draw by hand if you want, or just click every single one, and you can make, look like the streets are cut out. Now, I like to change my options here in the shadows effects, because you don't want this outer shadow really for something like a street. You don't really want that coming off. So what you can do is you can just straight up turn off that outer shadow. The inner shadow, I like my shadows to be a little darker, so I'll change it to be a much more straight black option. And then you can go ahead and change the intensity and the blur to really make it look like these cities have streets with sidewalks. Now, I'm going to back the blur down a little bit. I just want to have enough that it's like, hey, this is lower than this. And now you have that, and you can go in, and mine is a little bit different since I made the cutout the bottom. It's going to be a little bit flip-flopped, but you can go in and change it to be an asphalt in there and use the foreground, since that's technically the foreground, not the background. And really change how that is. And you're like, oh, I don't want my sidewalks to be brown. I want my sidewalks to be more gray. You can go in and you see the stroke. You can just change that to be more of a gray color. And now you have a gray sidewalk with a street underneath it. And if you want to make your streets really feel more like a road, you can go into the line tool, and you can find the city streets, you can find the gritty yellow line ground detail. And with this, follow the holding control again. Holding control, you can make a line through. And let's make this a little bit thicker so people can actually see it. Now you have this line going through the city, but city street lines aren't just straight lines with no breaks. There's breaks in the line, so you know where you can turn and things like that. So all you have to do is you can go into the portal, or you can use the nodes tool and move the nodes. But I like the portal because it just lets you cut it out immediately. So you can go ahead and use the portal tool and click. And there's the delete portal option, but I've noticed that if I just click, it just goes away. You don't have to click that extra option. And you can see what gets blacked out is what's gone. And so you can go through and get rid of the one in the intersection, so there's nothing there, and kind of just follow that every other tile pattern. And now you have a city street with lines. And you go in and do other detail work, but I'm not going to go into that in this tutorial. So here's how you can make your buildings and make your cities feel a little bit more in theme and in genre, rather than using the city streets and city regional textures that are a little bit more fantasy. So, yeah, thank you for watching.